today on the show, we have Dr. Allan Bacon, correct? Bacon.
That's absolutely right.
I love it. It's bacon and you do nutrition and all that. So I'm sure I'm not the first to make that joke, but we got you on the show. I really appreciate your time, man, coming on here. We've talked a little bit on Instagram about gaming was the first thing we talked about. And then we kind of have been talking a little bit more. And I was like, man, let's get this guy on the show. So yeah, man, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit more about yourself. Hit us with the quick elevator pitch, what you do, who you are, all that.
Well, first off, thanks for having me on, Kyle. I really appreciate this, and I like to get some face-to-face time with some other guys in the industry doing things right. Because I think that if we talk these things out, the fitness, nutrition, and reinforce the right messages, that's how it really starts to spread. And God knows there's enough bullshit out there. As far as me, I had originally had a career in dental surgery. I was a dentist that kind of focused on oral surgery, and after 10 years, I decided to start to dip my foot into fitness because it was a passion for me. I had already been working in the supplement industry as a professional formulator. And, I turned to my wife and I said, hey, what do you think about running a coaching business kind of on the side and see how things go? And she was all for it. And at the time, she was a competitive Olympic weightlifter who ended up breaking some American records, went to worlds. And so it was kind of a nice thing for us to get into as a couple because it was complementary. I focus specifically on general health, bodybuilders and powerlifters. And she could pick up Olympic weightlifters, which she specialized in CrossFitters because she was a regionals qualifying CrossFitter as well. So that's kind of how I got started. And the first couple years, it was the standard things were going pretty well. And then it started to take off. And, it became to the point where the quality of life was there, and I switched full time, and I've been doing that ever since.
So do you still do some side work with the dental stuff, or is that you're completely in fitness and nutrition now?
I'm completely in fitness and nutrition now. I haven't practiced for 2 or 3 years at this point. It was right before COVID that I ended up switching over permanently. And we had originally, my wife and I were living in North Carolina, and we had always wanted to live in Hawaii, and we had bought a house in 2017, and they have really strict protocols for getting pets in. And we had an older dog at the time. And so there's typically an 8-month process that you have to go through because none of the islands have any rabies. And so they want to keep it that way. In the initial exams for it, it was found that he had some heart failure. And so they told us in 2017, after we had bought our house, hey, he's not going to make the flight over. We can't clear him to be able to go over there. And we're like, great. We literally just put the down payment on this place. And so we were like, he's been with us, and he was 13 at the time. And he wasn't experiencing any really decreases in quality of life. So we were like, okay, well, the vet tells us that he's got 6 months. Let's see how that goes. We'll rent our house out for that period of time, and he'll live out his golden years, and then we'll move on when we can. So at that point, I started thinking, if this dog is going to go out, let's go out in style. And I started feeding him McDonald's every day. And I think this motivated him to live because he ended up living for 3 years, and then ended up passing literally right before COVID, the shutdowns. And so we had rented the place for 3 years before moving out. But because we knew that this was coming, that's why the name of my business is Maui Athletics. We ended up moving to Maui, Hawaii. But this was just another example of how much of a big motivator food can be.
Yeah, definitely. That is insane. I never would have thought that. That's one, you guys made some huge life changes, like
Major.
moving, like that's like the biggest stressors in your life that you could have, like moving and career changes all at the same time. Like that's, and the unfortunate passing of your pet. I'm sorry to hear that. That sucks.
It's one of those things that when your dog ends up living until 16, it's sad. Yeah. But put things into perspective, things are about as good as they possibly could be. But that move during COVID, it actually probably made things easier for us. We weren't really fighting to get around the island. There were no parking or traffic issues. Certainly getting out here was kind of fun, as we took 6 different flights, since every flight was constantly being canceled or rerouted during those times. But it was a good transition. And for me, um, because fitness was a passion project, and because it was something that I really enjoyed doing, I think that it was a great switch, because you're never gonna typically in fitness, you're never gonna make as much money as you would in medicine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the quality of life is there. I get to hang out with people like you during my day, and I get to talk about things that I'm really passionate about with people that are really, you know, excited to see the progress that they're making. And so, I think that a lot of people need to put that type of thing in perspective and say, hey, how much do I really need to live comfortably? And then once I've gotten to that point, what do I need to do to improve my quality of life? And this was one of those things that was a great improvement for me.
Well, and you're also living in Hawaii, which that
Yeah, that
that's not
there's
half
never
bad.
a bad thing there.
Yeah, exactly. So you're doing pretty well, I'd have to say. But well, so tell me a little bit. I liked how we started the show, and you're like, dispelling some, different things in fitness and nutrition. So I think just to start this all off, what is, I guess, this week or this month, the biggest thing you've had to dispel, either fitness or nutrition?
I think the biggest thing for me, um, at least recently, and this is a running theme throughout the entire time that I've been working with clients, um, expectations on how quickly you can lose fat or how quickly you can build muscle are probably the biggest issues that I consistently run into. And the past couple years, there have been a lot of studies coming out about how you can lose both fat and gain muscle at the same time, right? When you look at that in the research, it is technically possible. The problem with that is, I think, how fitness professionals have been putting that out there. And now what I've been getting, or what I've been noticing in a lot of clients, is that people will expect to be able to do both at great magnitudes at the same time. And in my experience, and from what I've seen in the literature, it's probably not as impressive as people believe. In our minds, we always think of that Instagram transformation, right? You think of that guy that in 3 or 4 months went from looking kind of flabby to looking ripped and having popping delts. And the reality is, it probably doesn't work that way. And it's probably one of those situations that's going to take a lot longer than you think it's going to need to take,
Mm-hmm.
unless you have significant amounts of body fat. You're brand new to training in some cases. You're coming back from an injury, or steroids.
Yeah. No, I
This
think.
just doesn't seem to pan out quite the same way in natural athletes, particularly those that have had a year or more experience than what most people believe.
Mm. So let's say someone is 30, 60 pounds overweight. We'll start with 60. Like, let's think about it.
60 pounds overweight makes the choice pretty easy, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
If you're 60 pounds overweight, and someone tells me, hey, I want to lose body fat and I want to gain muscle, I think it's pretty easy to say, okay, well, let's go into either a modest or moderate calorie deficit, and throw in some strength training into play, and you'll typically do both
Mm-hmm.
in a significant manner to where the person feels like they're making progress. Now, that becomes different when you're 20 to 30 pounds away, and particularly if you have that traditionally skinny fat body type. Um, in most of those cases, it may make sense to sit closer to maintenance and work on strength, building lean muscle for a year or two, in my opinion. And people hate to hear that, because the one thing that you want is, you want immediate results, and you want to say, hey, I'm coming into the summer season,
Mm-hmm.
particularly where with we are in the year. You want to look better now, and you want to know that what you're doing is working. And particularly for those skinny fat people, the right choice, even though it may not be the easiest thing emotionally, maybe putting aside those distinct physique goals initially, and focusing on building that base. Because I mean, you've probably seen those people that immediately go into a fat loss phase, and then they lose a bunch of fat, and they're like, you know what, I just kind of look a little doughy. And it's because they're missing that underlying muscle that will give them the shape that they're envisioning in their mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so for those people, it usually makes sense to spend that time building lean muscle for a year or two. And people hate to hear that it could take that long as a general recommendation.
Well, and I think too, if you're someone that's skinny fat, you probably haven't touched a weight in ever or in a
Mm-hmm.
very, very long time. And so I think that's a good recommendation. It's not what people definitely want to hear. I guess what's your definition of skinny fat?
Well, skinny fat's going to be essentially a perception,
Hmm.
and there's not going to be a distinct like, hey,
This
it's
isn't a
this percentage of,
scientific term,
yeah,
right?
it's not going to be like, hey, it's this percentage of body fat.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at a person that essentially has that feeling that they're a little bit doughy. They don't feel like they're really fat, but they feel that they're kind of doughy. Um, and a lot of that is because there's not significant underlying muscle to give yourself the bulk to say either look like a power lifter or have a little bit more shape when you're at moderate levels of body fat. Now, the nice thing about having that higher level of lean muscle is that a person with significant amounts of lean muscle at 18% body fat or 20% body fat is going to look significantly different than a person that's at 18 or 20% body fat with very little lean muscle. You're going to look very doughy, and that's essentially the epitome of skinny fat with little amounts of body fat, whereas you might look more a like a linebacker if you've
Yeah.
got significant amounts of lean muscle.
Mm. So do you subscribe to the idea that though we are dealing with a obesity epidemic, as they call it, do you think that we are a population, at least in America, that is more under muscled more so than overweight with obesity?
I think it's both. I
Yeah.
mean, I think that that's a really good question, but I think that I mean, obviously obesity levels have been creeping up over the decades, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's it's easy when we talk about this to try to point at one significant cause, but I think that because obesity is so multifactorial, we got a lot of things in play. We have an increasingly sedentary population because so much of our daily life is becoming automated, right? We're sitting more at computers, we're sitting more on our phones. I mean, we're talking on a podcast that's and we live our lives on Instagram, and a lot of this is adding into the obesity epidemic for sure, in combination with the fact that um, hyper palatable, very high calorie density foods are just very prevalent now, whereas if you look at the 70s and 80s, they weren't quite the same prevalence. And so this combination of not moving and eating more calories is certainly adding into it. And I know that when fitness professionals talk about this, um, one of the things that seems to irk people so much these days is the comment of, eat less, move more. And that's certainly not extremely actionable, right? But it is probably the base of the conversation that we need to have and say, okay, well, how can we start to do some of these things? And that's when you start to switch to habit type talks of, coaches always talk about NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, now getting out and getting your steps. And that's one of those ways to increase that step count. And then we talk about the habit changes with nutrition, add vegetables to every meal. Well, why are we doing that? Well, not only for the nutrients, but we're doing it because we want to add the volume, and we want to add volume in a way that, one, makes us less hungry so we don't binge on more junk, but two, takes up that space in a way that's really calorie thrifty.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, eat less, move more is the beginning of the conversation that a lot of people these days are kind of downplaying. And yeah, without any follow-up, it is problematic, but that's what we need to branch off of to start something that can get people some results.
So with that said, like, I guess if you were to have someone that started out fresh with you, right? Like, are you pushing to have them move more, or are you already having nutrition conversations with someone? I mean, I'm sure it's
I
based off of what they want, but
Sure, it is, and it's based off of what they want and what they're able to do. But
mm-hmm.
I like having a combination of both,
Yeah.
because both have such low barriers to entry, right? I mean, we can oftentimes find different ways to move around. And with the way that technology has become kind of a problem for us with movement, it can also aid us in this as well. And one of the things that I like to talk to people about with that is use things like Audible, and use things like Netflix and those things. Hop on the treadmill and just watch what TV you were going to watch anyways at home. But while walking, I mean, if it gets you moving, one, that's a great thing to begin with, because I think that movement is one of the big key pieces that's missing. But two, particularly if I can get a client to start going to the gym while doing that, even if all they do is go there to walk on the treadmill and watch something on Netflix, that's awesome, because in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, hey, we're starting to establish that routine of what do we do in the evenings, 4 days a week, we get up and we go to the gym. And so then in the future, we have a much easier path to moving into things like weight training, to moving into things that may be one, either a little scary or something that they're just not ready for to begin with. And so I think that the easiest thing that people can start possibly doing is getting your step count up, either walking around outside on a treadmill, whatever it is, but do it in an enjoyable way. And then start to address whatever habits that you can, even if it's simple ones incrementally that you start out with, like we said, add in vegetables to start, put in some vegetables in every meal. It doesn't matter what it is, just do that. Start to think about what can we add first before what we can take away, if they're not ready to take away certain things like the buffalo wings that they eat every night.
That I take a similar approach. And I guess the biggest thing for me is a lot of people that come to me, their biggest barrier to just movement is typically pain, because they're coming for some sort of kind of pain reduction. And in that circumstance, it's actually, I found, easier to get someone to get buy-in and start to make changes, because it's like you start to get the ball rolling. It's like, okay. And that's something that always made me mad about working in a clinic, in a physical therapy clinic, is you couldn't get follow through to like really see this person change their life. Like, you got them out of pain, cool, but you wouldn't be like, dude, you're 60 pounds overweight. Like, this probably isn't helping your pain and how you move and all these different things.
Absolutely.
And so when I help someone like get out of pain, then that starts the natural conversations of like, we got the wind at our back. Let's get you in the gym a little bit more. We're going from an at-home program to, hey, you're on the treadmill twice a week. Let's turn that into a machine circuit now. And it really starts to pick up. I think something I could do better, though, is probably adding in nutrition a bit earlier. And something I've been trialing is telling people just to focus on protein. Like, hey, I want...
That's great.
Yeah. I'm curious, like, would you do this something similar, or like, what's your kind of like...
I do something similar. And so I'm fully supporting you in this. But again, you're going to have to feel out each client and figure out, what is this person ready for? And I think that if your practice is, I'm going to start out with getting them to, start moving a little bit more, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if that's what is the lead in to a better, healthier life, that's great. Because if they start to see, 5-10 pounds come off, which you can often see just by walking.
Right.
That can, one, you're in a pain alleviation spot where I don't particularly do that, because that's outside of my scope, but it's a great thing for you because, like you said, hip pain, back pain, knee pain, a lot of that is from carrying some excess weight, on top of the fact that motion is lotion. Getting movement going will oftentimes help to rehab that a little bit. And just as an example of that, I broke my neck 3 years ago. I'm counting the years now at this point. I broke my neck 3 years ago. For 4 to 6 months, I couldn't walk. I was told that I would never lift again. And then I got in touch with a neurosurgeon on Oahu, and they've got, some of the best doctors in the world there. Whereas these outer islands that I live on, like Maui, these doctors are, they're here for like a year and then they leave. So you never really get any continuity.
Mm-hmm.
But I talked to him and he was like, I used to work with Wake Forest University's football team. And one thing that I can tell you is that I see people with the injuries that you have. And in a general population sense, I might agree with these assessments that you've had in the past where maybe you won't be experiencing the quality of life that you've had. But with lifters or with people that start lifting, we start to see a much greater resolution of symptoms and return to normal life. And so when I was able and starting to move again, I started doing Jefferson curls. And it would be some of the last things that a lot of people would think about, spinal flexion, but motion is lotion. And it ultimately helped me rehab a double spinal herniation, C4, C5, severe stenosis. And what you're doing with getting your clients moving is a wonderful, wonderful thing, because I think that too many people get afraid. Oh, well, I'm experiencing a little bit of pain.
Right.
And you can correct me here if you want to. Based on the research that I've read with pain rehab and all that kind of stuff, and this is what I was doing when I was in my injury, it seems to me that pushing to the point of pain or just into the point of pain, assuming no neurological or nerve symptoms, is smarter than avoiding pain. With pain avoidance, it almost seems like you can exacerbate those issues or slow your recovery time or impair your recovery time. Whereas if you push slightly into pain, now, not anything that's going to exacerbate it, but, not really saying, oh, I'm starting to feel a little bit of pain, I need to stop this. Say, okay, it's getting a little dicey. I'm going to push this slowly and controlled and work my way through it. And I think that a lot of these people, by giving them the recommendations that you're giving, you're really setting them up for a lot of success, not only in weight loss and in health in the future, but really pushing them to survive these potentially devastating injuries that could impair them for the rest of their lives.
Right. Well, and that's I agree. Like, again, with the research, the way it says, just with the way pain works, we don't fully understand it. That's just what it is. Like, we know a couple of sure things, like, hey, if you have restricted blood flow, that can cause some pain, right?
Sure.
Tension, that stuff. But when you start to especially have an injury that's greater than 6 months, it's like this, what was very straightforward, you got a cut here or you tore this labrum, starts to turn into like this crazy mess of who knows what the hell it is, right?
And how much of it is expectation effect?
Exactly. Expectations, beliefs. And that's where a lot of people that come to me, they're all like, I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't do this. They've got 3 different, a chiropractor, a physical therapist, and a massage therapist, and a trainer, all telling them conflicting things. And they're like,
oh, I'm going to cut you off really quickly and let you go. You're going to love this. When I hurt my neck, when I had the double spinal herniation, I saw 3 physical therapists. And keep in mind, I have 2 physical therapists in my family. And so I just wasn't able to get to them on the East Coast, United States for reviews.
Right.
But I saw 3 physical therapists here. The first one worked on me once, and then she said, "You're too big for me to work on." And I was sitting there thinking, my sister is 120 pounds and like 5'2". I'm like, if she can work on me, you can certainly work on me. And so she's like, I'm going to refer you out. And she was super nice, everything. She just felt like it wasn't her place. And coming from a medical background, if you feel uncomfortable or like you're not the best choice, a good clinician will say, hey, I need to refer you out because I'm not the right person for you. So much respect to her. The next person that I went to, he told me that I hurt my neck because my breathing muscles were off. And I was like, I've been doing this a while. I'm pretty sure that I can breathe pretty well. And so we knew what caused the issue. This was when we had gotten to Hawaii and we had shipped our stuff in a pod. And my wife was out at the gym and I was like, I'm going to unload this pod by myself. And the pods have this lip on the upper side. So you open the doors and there's this lower lip. And I decided to pick up a couch by myself and bend my spine, kind of like shift my body to get it up and under the lip. And what's, something that's going to injure you. It's when you're not in the gym, when you've not warmed up. I mean, I can pull mid 600 pounds in a deadlift, but I can't lift the couch because I'm an idiot and I didn't warm up. And, and I tried to bend my spine in the middle of it and, popped it just like that. And so he tells me that it's my my breathing muscles are off, and just gives me a bunch of breathing exercises. And I'm like, why are we trying to diagnose something? Like, we don't need to identify the cause
Right.
when we know the cause. We have an MRI, we know what caused it. And so that didn't work. And then they sent me to a new physical therapist, and she said that it was because I can't do push-ups well. And I was like, wait a minute. This is another thing that I'm pretty confident I can do pretty well.
Right.
And so, after that is when I really started to look into the rehab stuff. And like I said, I'm certainly not as learned in the process as you are, which is why it was interesting for me to bring up this idea of, okay, well, taking things into pain. This is what I've seen. What are your experiences with clients? And that's when I started taking on that rehab myself, with some guidance from my physical therapist family.
Mm-hmm.
And it finally started to turn around.
Right. Well, I think too, you're someone that's motivated. Number one, like you moved to Hawaii, you did all these big changes. You're someone that started a business. You're a busy guy. You're type A, I'd probably say. So it's, I
mean, anybody that goes into medicine, I think, is a little bit type A, probably.
Exactly. So like, people telling you what you did wrong and what you can't do, like, that's already gonna just like subconsciously piss you off. You're like, no.
Going back to your comment about the fact that pain is so multifactorial, because it really is. I think one of the big things that I had working in my favor was I wasn't afraid of pain. I didn't expect to be in pain.
Right.
And so I think that's, like we said, expectation effects are a really big thing. And even when I couldn't really walk, and just to clarify, people would say, well, if C4, C5 was affected, why couldn't you walk? The issue was that C4, C5 was causing neurological symptoms in my right arm.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think that people realize how much their arms kind of move during locomotion. And so anytime that I would walk for more than like 5 or 10 minutes, I would have severe pain radiating down my neck through my arm. And I couldn't walk, and it wasn't anything that was wrong with my legs. I could physically move my legs, but the pain was too great. And what was funny was, during that time period, I kept saying, I shouldn't be in pain. This is dumb. Why is this happening? Right. And so I kept telling myself, there's no reason that there should be pain here. And eventually it worked itself out.
Yeah. But that's a belief that you had. And
yeah.
So I herniated L4, L5. I was two little nurses. This 500+ pound patient falls on the floor and can't get up on his own. And I'm like,
and you weren't warmed up.
Wasn't warmed up. And I'm like, I can pull 475. And
yeah,
this will be nurses helping me.
And he's helping a bit.
Yeah. No, he didn't help. He like went the opposite direction. And like, immediate, we're halfway through the lift. Nurses are not helping me. He's wiggling, and it, boom, immediate down my leg, complete like numbness. And I was like, here we go. Like, this is great.
It's always those. I mean, and it's funny because lifters will do some of the craziest stuff when we're in the gym, but we almost always get injured. People in general almost always get injured doing the most mundane daily things. Mm-hmm. And even if you look at all the research on mitigating injury risk, what's the research is really surprising to a lot of people in the fact that stretching, static stretching, doesn't seem to have a whole lot of support for mitigating injury risk, but lifting weights has a massive amount of support for mitigating injury risk. And it's because you essentially train your body to be able to handle, I mean, you improve strength in tendons and ligaments, soft tissues, which tends to be a really big issue. Your bone health gets a lot better. Your skeletal muscular system becomes much more able to handle these types of things. Mm-hmm. And so going full circle and bringing this all back together, starting your people off when, okay, well, I want to lose some weight. Okay, great. Well, let's get to walking. And then they do that. And then they get into the gym for a while, and then they get used to going to the gym. So that's not as much of a barrier to entry anymore, because it's not as scary, because you've met some people and you've seen some progress and you know that you're doing well. And then you start to get into lifting, and then all of these things start to compound on yourself. You gain confidence, you mitigate those injury risks, you feel less pain throughout the day. There's all of these benefits that we could get into, and it's really hard to sell these to people. And I'm not talking about like in a monetary sense, but to sell the benefits of a healthy lifestyle to somebody who hasn't experienced it yet, because it's hard to fathom.
Yeah. You don't know what you don't know. Right.
No.
And
And so your process of getting people moving is a wonderful first step because it's the gateway to all these other benefits.
exactly. And that I look at pain reduction as that's the 10 pounds they lost.
Mm-hmm.
That's your buy-in. I get the pain reduction, and it's like, okay, now they're less fearful to move in general. We know what can work, what they can do without pain. And it's like, stack weight, man. Like, stay consistent.
Yeah.
You're 2 days a week. Let's make it 3 days a week. Let's make it 4 days a week. Let's see what we can continue to add and carve out this time per day. And that's what I love about, at least with this type of, being an online trainer now. I feel like there's so much, you're acting more as a manager of sorts over this person versus that one-on-one session where you just like get some superficial, how you doing? How was your weekend? Here's a workout. Okay, see you next week. Or like,
you do, and I actually find, outside of directly adjusting a person's form, which I still don't have a whole lot of issues with videos and diagrams and stuff that I use. I mean, I've been doing this long enough that I have a whole bank of all those things. But I actually think that a lot of people are skeptical about online coaching, when in actuality, for me, I would say it's superior in most cases. And I say that because I don't know how you do it, but for me, people have 24/7 email access to me as long as, I'm available and can answer. Now, obviously, I tell them, okay, well, we've got like a 24 to 48 hour window that I can respond to you. Don't expect 5 minutes, but they can send me questions anytime. So it's not like you have to wait 1 or 2 weeks in between every session to be able to get some answers. And particularly when you start doing more nutrition guidance, people need that.
Yeah.
I get emails daily from clients, and they're like, I'm experiencing this challenge in my life. How do I address it? And I say, okay, great. It's good that you're experiencing this now while you're working with me. And I actually tell people that. People are like, I've had the worst thing in my life happen. My grandmother died. And I'm like, that's awesome. And they're like, what? And I'm like, hold on. When you have these types of things crop up in your life, if you experience it with a coach that's there to be able to help you, we can give you the guidance. We can act as a parachute. We can give you the guidance and some of the practices, the habits, the ways around dealing with this, so that when you face this in real life, long after you've graduated from my coaching, you'll be able to handle it yourself. I think one of the things that people, just to put things in perspective, people don't realize is that if you work with a coach and you have the easiest path through, you're going to have to face those types of things at some point in your life. And so what I try to do is I try not to be crass about it, but I do reframe it for my clients when they're experiencing these things, because it gives them, one, a little bit of hope in the situation, and saying, hey, this situation from an objective perspective sucks, but we can use this to our advantage in some way. And here are the resources that you need to be able to figure this out. And so look at them and then come back to me with any questions that you have. And typically this ends up helping people far more than they ever expected. And it really changes those challenges in your life from, oh, woe is me, to how can I deal with this? And what can I do to push through? And that's a really great thing that is so difficult to teach.
Totally. No, I completely agree. And I've definitely had that experience. It's people, they miss a week or two of training, and it's like, that's real life, like that's okay.
And, you gain 2 pounds, and all of a sudden, I mean, people need to experience that when they're on their journey.
It's not but when that happens.
Oh, it's going to happen. I mean, Christmas is coming. And so that's, like it's so funny working with clients, and I've had clients that have been with me for years and years and years. And they're the people that kind of get used to the fact that, hey, in December, I'm probably going to gain 2 pounds, 3 pounds, whatever it is. And that's fine. And so we set proper expectations, and going back to like what we talked about in the very beginning, proper expectations is the name of the game.
Right.
And anybody that has a good physique has learned to manage those expectations with what's going on. And that if you're going to gain 1 or 2 pounds from Thanksgiving to New Year's, you're going to lose that over the coming months, and you can either get back to where you were if that was a significant level of health, or you can go beyond that if you just push through it. But I think that these people that think that it's going to be a straight shot the entire time are in for a rude awakening, because like you said, it's not if, it's when.
Exactly. And that's expectations are hard to manage, especially today's age with social media, for sure. So it's
Well, I think the social media sets up a lot of false expectations. I mean, things
exactly.
like The Biggest Loser sets up a lot of false expectations. Things
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, Deborah from the cul-de-sac will tell you that she got on keto and in 4 weeks she lost 16 pounds. Well, that's great. But she lost 6 pounds of body fat and the rest was water and muscle glycogen. But that's the thing that she doesn't realize. And then in 3 months, Deborah gets off of keto because, let's be honest, keto probably isn't sustainable for most people, nor should it be, because it opens up a lot of nutrient deficiencies.
Mm-hmm.
But those muscle glycogen stores, and the water's going to flood right back in. And then what is she going to do? She's going to be depressed. She's going to not understand what's going on. And she's going to say, hey, my body just doesn't want to lose the body fat, when maybe she had the pizza and she went up 4 or 5 pounds and she still hadn't added on any body fat, because one bad meal is not going to make you fat, just like, one salad's not going to make you thin. But that starts that spiral.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think that brings up an interesting point for those listening. Like, it's not always, I think you can pick out different measuring tools for people. I don't know how you do it, but it's like someone like that who gets on the scale and they're like 5 pounds more, like what the hell happened? And then, like you said, they spiral. Like maybe that's someone that you would put in, what's your favorite pair of pants that you wear? Or future pants that you want to wear, like use that as a gauge. Like, I'm curious your thoughts on that.
So, so for me with my clients, I do a combination for tracking purposes. I do a combination of weight, progress pictures, and four measurements. I take hips, bicep, thigh, and waist.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I value the measurements the most because they can kind of tell us a little bit more of what's going on. And people will typically jump that 3 pounds and their measurements will all stay the same, or
Yep.
just barely raise. And then we can say, hey, look, we know that this is water weight gain. We're looking at your food diary. We can see that you had, nachos or whatever it is with massive amounts of salt, and you maybe you got 1,000 more calories than what you're normally getting within 48 hours of your check-in or whatever it is. And we can hopefully talk that out. Now, the really big thing for the people that are listening that are looking to be one, successful, and two, good clients, the biggest thing that you can do for someone like Kyle or me is be open with your lines of communication.
Mm-hmm.
And one, that means telling us what you feel is working and what isn't working. Um, but two, letting us know, when you have these feelings of loss of control or spiraling, because that's when you can stop it in its tracks before it gets out of control. If you wait for it to quicksand or for it to snowball, that's when things become a problem. But if you're off track for 3 or 4 days, that's fine. We can get you back on track really quickly. If you're off track for 4 or 6 weeks, that becomes harder to help you emotionally, because you feel like things are so much worse.
Definitely. Definitely. I've definitely noticed that with my clients, and even for like coaches listening, make sure that your clients can trust you enough to come to you with that type of information. I think that's something very important as well, because I've definitely had,
Well,
go ahead.
it allows you to adjust short-term goals, and I think that that's an extremely important thing. And it allows
Mm-hmm.
you to adjust short-term goals in the way that whenever I talk about goal setting with my clients, we talk about, I would never let a client say, my goal is to get to 165 pounds. Okay, great. What happens at 165? Like, what's magic about that number? Nothing really. So we talk about habit and routine based goals. And you may start out with, um, say you're working with Kyle, and you've gotten to like 4 days a week weight training. And then all of a sudden you're an accountant and it's March, and work has massively picked up, and emotionally you are struggling to get in those 4 days of weight training, and all it's making you do is feel like a failure. Well, okay, I mean, this is why you bring it up to him, and he says, okay, well, can you do 3 days a week? Can you do 2 days a week? What can you do? What can we adjust this to get you through this time period? Because there's different levels of success. And just like making it through the holiday season and minimizing rather than completely avoiding that weight gain is a good expectation. Being able to adjust these weekly or monthly short-term goals is a necessary skill. And there's no shame in saying, hey, I need to work out a little bit less right now. Kyle, you are insane. You're a bodybuilder and you want me to work out 5 days a week, but I just can't do it. And Kyle will say, okay, cool. Let's do a little bit less, but let's not give up on health entirely because we need to learn to work through these challenges. But let's see what you can do. And so by having that open line of communication, that's where your coach is going to be a very valuable asset to you. And I think people get embarrassed about that.
Yeah. Well, and I think people don't realize that they're allowed to change their routines.
And as a coach too, as a coach, don't feel bad to say, hey, let's drop a day off of your training.
Like I started, as soon as the weather got nice, in the wintertime, I was in the gym 6 days a week. I had nothing else to do. Like, it's like, let's go. I'm going to bulk. I'm going to do all this stuff. I got out of that process. As soon as the weather started getting nice, I dropped to 3 days a week because I was sick and tired of the gym. I just wanted to be outside. I wanted to, be in the yard, hang out with my dog, paddleboard, like do all the things and just enjoy the weather. I've just picked up to 4 days a week. And nothing crazy's happened.
No, and I think that people really need to understand that this is an option, because I think a lot of people don't realize that this is an option. Yeah. And there's going to be times in your life that you're going to need to adjust those short-term routines and goals, because it's the only way you're going to make it through.
Exactly. Make it through. And, I will say, like, I have set myself up in the past with working out to where I can benefit from dropping to 3 days a week, and like nothing crazy is going to happen probably. I can focus on different goals at this point in time versus in the wintertime or something. But yeah, just knowing that it's when we fall off the bandwagon, that's when things get bad.
Yeah, I mean, getting back into things is always much more difficult than totally. Just saying, hey, I can just slide right back into what I was doing a couple of days ago. I mean, that habit reinforcement is a really big thing.
It's the hardest part, staying consistent in that habit. So here's some, because we got a little bit of time here. I'm going to hit you with like a little speed round of some questions.
Okay.
So got some clients, they want to cut, they want to do those different types of things. How long would you recommend someone stays in, say, a 250 to 500 calorie deficit? And like, what would be the extent of time that you would allow them to stay there?
Well, are we assuming that they're 100% consistent with this the entire time through?
Let's say 75.
Okay. I mean, so we got decent. Yeah. So it's going to depend on their current body composition. Okay. And I say that because if you have somebody with significant obesity, then you can let them ride for quite a while.
Right.
Body fat is going to be metabolically protective in the calorie deficit, I mean. And so they'll have energy stores to pull from that will mitigate some of these changes, metabolic adaptation, some of the changes in hormones, some of the changes in energy levels and all that. And that's fine. If we have a person that is leaner, I don't love, I mean, and this is going to be dependent. It's different per person. I don't love being in a significant calorie deficit for more than like 12 weeks at a time without bumping back up. But I typically will not use a time frame as my way to gauge this. What I do with my check-ins is I have a form that they fill out online. And part of the information that they give me is they give me their energy levels, they give me their hunger levels, and then then there's a spot for them to tell me how they're feeling emotionally. And so a lot of times what I'll do is I'll monitor that. And typically throughout the year, that will allow you to bring a person back to maintenance or slightly above based on how they're feeling and in response to what they're experiencing in their life. And so for me, what I like to do is I like to take that a little bit more organically. So rather than saying, hey, you've got a 12-week or 16-week cutoff and you can't do it anymore, or 8-week or whatever it is, because some people like to do less. I like to monitor how a person's feeling. If I also monitor step count, so I can get a proxy for NEAT and see what's going on there. So is their step count majorly dipping? Are they Are they feeling like they're binging? Is their hunger major? Because the two big things, you know, when you're in a calorie deficit and metabolic adaptation kicks in, it's not that your resting metabolic rate drops, because it doesn't really drop that much. On average, resting metabolic rate drops maybe 25 or 50 calories per day. It's not much. But what ends up causing that stall that people feel like is stopping them from losing weight is their NEAT drops. So they stop doing all of the things where they're walking around, they stop fidgeting, they stop doing all that little extra movement, and hunger drive kicks in. And so they're mindlessly eating a good bit more. So if you monitor step count and you monitor hunger signaling for a person, you can kind of get an idea of how much is this affecting them. Do we need to take some time to get out of this and give some more calories, you know, and switch the focus from losing body fat right now to working on performance. So rather than give you a specific time period, I would say monitor someone's emotional levels, monitor their hunger levels, and monitor you know, their step count as a proxy for NEAT, and then make your call as a coach or as a person that's doing that themselves, based on what you need emotionally and physically in that sense.
Yeah, and that's a good call, because it's, you know, I've heard like 3 months. You never want to be like that calorie deficit in 3 months. It typically, I think, hits that area. Maybe it's expectations, but I know
I think the date itself is probably arbitrary. Right. I mean, saying 3 months is probably arbitrary. I mean, even if we look at things like refeed studies, refeed data, refeeds tend to not be long enough to really reset any hormones or anything like that. You know, so what I would do if you're experiencing these issues is go into a full diet break for a little while.
Yeah.
You know, 4, 8, 12 weeks.
I've been saying that. So I started cutting, say, like in December, right? The first week of December, went through the holidays, lost like 25 pounds.
That's brave.
It was.
Started to cut in December.
I mean, granted, I was eating like 5,500 calories in a day during my bulk. Like, it's like, it was insane. So it
was an easy shift.
Yeah, basically. So my cut, or my start of a cut, was like not drinking mass gainer protein shakes, basically, but keeping my protein up as high as I could. So I went from like the 1,200 calorie mass gainer protein shakes to just like the 250 calorie ones.
Yeah.
And that started like bringing me down a little bit. So I lost about 25 pounds, but I hit a point, and my coach, Matt Domney, I've been working with him, and my pressing just halted. And as you're kind of talking about this, I stopped like the fidgeting that you were talking about. I used to fidget all the time. My step count was about the same, but I noticed that I was way more of a couch potato. Like, and work was tough. Like, trying to be motivated for work was very difficult, I found, and to do those little things. But another thing was my pressing, like my squats and my pull movements, those were all still going up. Pressing halted. Like, it was bad. It was tough. And I was like, dude, how much do I have to pay you to get my bench back up? He's like, you need to take a break. He's like, just go into go into maintenance phase. I've been in a maintenance phase for probably like 2 months now. And I think
that's probably smart. Yeah, I think that's probably smart. And it's really hard to get a client to do that a lot of times, because we want to get to our end goal as fast as possible. When the way that I explain it to people is it's like this: you're in Washington, D.C., and you want to take a road trip to Los Angeles. The answer to do that is to not get in your car, go 120 miles per hour as fast as you can, and try to get there as quickly as possible. The answer is you're going to go 70, follow the speed limit, have better gas mileage, stop in Kansas City, get some gas, and then continue on. You know, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to be broken down in fucking Topeka if you just hit the gas and, you know, you never stop to refuel. And that's essentially what ends up happening here. Now, you know, it's hard to think about it that way. Right. Because a lot of times people think, well, if I'm in maintenance, then I'm not doing anything. And that's 100% wrong. That's not what's happening here. So for me, I stopped calling it maintenance, because I found when I called it maintenance, my clients were like, okay, well, this is code for it's time to fuck around. And so what I did was I call it a primer now. And so we go to a primer phase, and a primer phase is just maintenance. But
Yeah.
we do that because mentally we now feel like we're doing something, and we are doing something. But there's something about calling it maintenance that makes people feel I'm not doing anything.
Right.
And so during that maintenance phase, they stop working on those nutrition habits and routines that were, not only going to get them not only going to get them to Los Angeles, but allow them to stay in Los Angeles,
Mm-hmm.
for the rest of their life. Um, and so a lot of times it's, working with your coach, working with you, I'm sure that he doesn't have to put it this way because you have a little bit more background and understanding. But when you're talking to people that don't necessarily have that understanding, you have to phrase it in a way that makes it make sense.
That's really smart. I never thought of it because I hear maintenance. I'm like, cool, my lifts are going back up. Let's go.
And most people don't care about that.
Right.
Physique clients don't really care. I mean, people want to be strong to an extent,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't feel like they need to have to bench press 315.
Right.
They're like, I'm benching 185, I'm happy.
Mm-hmm.
And so seeing it drop from 185 to 165, they're like, yeah, it's fine, I don't care. So you rephrase it in a way that can get the result that you want, because in the back of your mind that this is what they need to get to where they want to be, even if they don't know that they need this at this point.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. I'm definitely stealing that. How are you on time? You good?
I'm good for now. Yeah.
Okay. I got another big question for you because this, I think, leads into what you were just talking about, which is, so say you have someone that is in a calorie deficit,
Mm-hmm.
but they are balls of the wall and they're working out, 4 times a week, 5 times a week, but then they're also doing fitness classes and random shit and their step counts through the roof, but they're only bringing in like 1,500 calories per day and they're stalling out. Have you, where, this is where I personally get confused and I'm like, what the hell is
Sure.
happening here? Like, what do you do with
So,
someone like this?
so first off, um, you cannot break the laws of thermodynamics.
Right.
So we know that even in, extreme weight loss cases, and I can get you research studies on this if you want to look at this. I actually have an entire write-up on metabolic adaptation stuff, and it talks about the idea of metabolic damage, which is essentially what we're kind of hinting at here.
Mm.
What's causing the stall? Is it metabolic damage? Is it something? What else is it? And I'm not saying that you're saying it is metabolic damage, but this is on the back of people's minds when this topic comes up.
Right. Do you
Is
mind
there?
just defining metabolic damage real quick?
So metabolic damage would be a if we took a predictive equation to say we've got a 200-pound person and we're saying, okay, well, how many calories does it take for them how many calories do they burn just living? What's their basal metabolic rate? If you have metabolic damage, theoretically, this would be caused by excessive dieting. Instead of it being, let's just use a random number, let's say 2,000 calories. Instead of it being 2,000 calories, somehow yours is down at 1,300. And so what you think is a deficit really isn't, because your metabolism is damaged. And so what the theory is in this idea is that you would need to do something to reset your metabolism to what it should be. Now, when you look at really low calorie diet research, metabolic damage doesn't happen. There's not a person that could say, a person of your body weight could not eat 1,000 calories and not lose weight.
Right.
It doesn't happen. And it's, we've looked at tons and tons of research. The crude but apt analogy here is, you never saw a fat guy in a concentration camp, in any of those pictures in a concentration camp. It's because metabolic damage doesn't exist. You cannot eat so low that you no longer lose weight.
Mm-hmm.
When we talked about metabolic adaptation, that actually does happen. But the difference there is, yes, you're going to have a little bit of metabolic slowdown. It's on the range of 25 to 50 calories per day. If half or a quarter of a fun-size Snickers bar is what's keeping you from losing body fat, there's something that needs to be adjusted in your daily routine. So what's really dropping that energy balance equation? And what we find is that it's a combination of neat drops, that non-exercise activity thermogenesis, all that stuff that you do with your fidgeting, your step count, you're sitting on the couch a lot more, all that stuff. So you're burning less energy throughout the day, and then cravings shoot up. So you're mindlessly eating, and you may not even be realizing that you're mindlessly eating that much. And so when you tell me that there's a client, and I've certainly experienced this. I mean, every coach has. You have the client that tells you that they're 100% on plan, and you've got your 230-pound male client, and he's at like 1,500 calories now because he's telling you everything's perfect. His step count's at 12,000 steps per day. Like, all of these things are pointing towards he's in a calorie deficit, a significant calorie deficit, in fact. And he's not losing body fat. Well, the reality is he's getting more calories in than he thinks. So the question becomes, well, how do I figure that out as a coach? Because that's what the real question here is. How do we figure out what's going on here if the math isn't adding up? Because you can't break the laws of thermodynamics. Either you are in a calorie deficit or you aren't. But a person of 220 pounds can't require 1,000 calories before they lose body fat. That's just unrealistic. You wouldn't be able to survive. Your body needs more calories than that to actually run its processes. And so, this is difficult because you're not with them in their kitchen figuring out what's going on here.
Right.
And it also depends on what you do for nutrition. How do you do nutrition with your clients? Do you do nutrition with your clients?
I do, yes. So a lot of the times I keep it pretty casual most of the time, because a lot of the people I do work with are already they're in fitness. They have relative routines. No one's coming to me with like, I need to lose 60 pounds. Like, the most I ever see is like 20, really 30 pounds max, which I then am using a lot more movement-based things to get them there, consistency. And then I sort of what I've been doing is letting nutrition come up naturally in conversation. Okay. They're like, I'm consistent. Should I eat this? And I'm like, I'm glad you asked. Let's do a food log.
Okay. So you do more habit-based.
Yes.
Okay. Do you have people weigh in any way or track in any way?
It depends on what they're comfortable with. So if they're weighing, then I'll have them, either use a scale. I've had clients use DEXA if they're able to, and measurements as well. So I do full measurements, just like I add the calves and the neck and the chest and delts in there, basically. But that'll usually measurements once a month, every 2 weeks, and then weigh in every 2 weeks or once a week.
Well, the reason that I was asking that is because I need to know where you're starting to be able to kind of guide you into where we should look first. And I think that you gave me what I needed to know. Okay. So the first thing that you would do is you would need to figure out exactly where they are. So you can't just take their word for it. And this doesn't have to be something that you're forcing them to do long-term. It just needs to be something that if you're trying to, plug holes in the ship, you need to track at least for 8 weeks. And say, hey, look, we need to do this just for now. We don't plan on doing this forever, but we need to identify what's going on here. I mean, when you tell me that you're having a teaspoon of peanut butter, maybe you're having 4.
Right.
And so all of a sudden you need to track some way. And that can either be macros, which is fine, or you could do something like a hand serving or whatever it is. But you just need to figure out some way to track. And then you follow them over a couple of weeks and you say, okay, well, what's going on here? Now that we've standardized this, are we seeing what we expect to be, the amounts that we expected? And if not, then you can adjust there. Then you've got your answer. And it's particularly easy with macros because you've got the numbers right there. So you can see exactly what the numbers are, assuming they're being input correctly. And for me, whenever people do that, I'll actually go through and do spot checks in MyFitnessPal to make sure that the entries that they have are accurate. Because as you know,
that's smart. I've never done that.
So you can have them use MyFitnessPal. You can have them make their diary public, and then they can send you the URL, and then you can check in there at any time.
And so by the right stuff.
And so a lot of times I've found that people are putting in chicken breasts that have half the calories of what chicken breast actually has. And then on top of that, people don't know that there's differences for cooked and raw measurements.
Yes.
And so they might be using a raw measurement when they're actually weighing it cooked. And depending on how it's been cooked, this could add a significant amount. What's actually happening is there's errors in what they're doing. And so your challenge as a coach and your challenge as a listener, for the people that are listening, is to identify, okay, well, where are my holes? Because you're not breaking the laws of thermodynamics. So you're tracking wrong in some manner. And when you look at the research, even registered dietitians are off by 250 calories per day. So you, as a person that's not a registered dietitian, I mean, they've shown that people are off by upwards of 47%.
Wow.
That's an extra 1,000 calories per day. And you don't know that you're off by an extra 1,000 calories per day. So you need to figure out some way to do that. So the first thing that I like to do is I like to say, okay, well, I like the accuracy of weighing and using something like MyFitnessPal or a hybrid meal plan type thing, and saying, hey, do this for 4, 6, 8 weeks, and then we'll see what happens here. And a lot of times you can identify, okay, well, we're using the wrong measurements here. We're like different types of rice have, sticky rice has 25% more calories than some other forms of white rice. And
You
so
see,
they've looked up white rice, but they're using sushi sticky rice because it tastes better, and it does. And so they're using that, and then all of a sudden they've got 25% more calories because they're using that for 3 fucking meals a day. They're having eggs and rice, and then they're having rice and chicken for lunch, and then they're having rice and salmon for dinner. And
right.
so now they've got 75% more calories from rice than they thought that they had. And so that's where I would start. And then after that, if you can identify holes there, hold on, I've got a name for this. Um, there's a thing that I call, okay, we're going to implement Project Boring as Fuck with my clients. And what I'll have them do is every day for 2 weeks, I'll, depending on their body weight, I'll adjust this, but I'll say, okay, for every meal, have 300 grams of grilled, baked, or air fried skinless chicken breast with whatever seasoning or whatever you want on it. As long as it's not oil or butter, 100 grams of long grain rice, and 2 fist-sized portions of um, green vegetables with 10 grams of oil-based salad dressing, or whatever it is. Now, what I've done is I figured out that this is roughly 1,700 to 2,000 calories. And so with the amounts that I just recommended. So what I'll do is I'll have them do that for 2 weeks. They know that it's going to suck, and they know that there's no variety, but it's okay because we know that we're only doing this for 2 weeks, and we're doing it to identify, okay, is it actually my intake, or is there something that's going on with the food choices that I'm making, and maybe there are some errors in there. And if you're just eating the exact same things and they've been prescribed just for this 2 week period, we're not trying to treat a disease, we're not trying to do anything that's outside of scope, but you do need to take these types of things into consideration. And then if they come back in 2 weeks, they've been like, yeah, I've been 100% on plan. I didn't have any bite licks or tastes of other things. I wasn't cooking in, significant amounts of butter or anything like that. I used Pam and, spread it around with a paper towel and did all that to minimize the influx there. And if they've lost weight, that there's something going on in the food choices that they're making, but it's very difficult to identify these things because you're not the one that's there cooking their foods.
Right. But that's a good way to, I mean, it is boring, but I'm
No,
sure
it's terrible.
too, as a client, like you're not going to be mad that you did that. Like it'll suck in the moment, but 2 weeks after you'll be like, I'm glad I did that because I think
I know
that's
what's wrong.
yeah. And that you're helping with like intuitive eating at that point. Like they really know like, or in cooking and what they actually are adding in. Like that's a very concrete
Yeah.
1,700 to 2,000 calories. Like there's no wiggle room there.
Right. And that's what you want to do. You want to
Mhm.
prevent all wiggle room. And again, is this sustainable? No. And I would
Right.
never tell people that you need a diet that's based off of rice, chicken, and vegetables.
Yeah.
I can't
Ugh.
say that. Now, is it a great thing to add in? Yes, it is. In a variety, in the context of a larger diet, yes.
Mhm.
But we're doing something specific here. And I think that coaches get a little bit afraid to give specific amounts, but I think that this is one of those times that you say, hey, look, these are the options that we have. We've done the MyFitnessPal checks, and things still aren't really working out in the way that we expect.
Right.
Let's try this and see what happens. And I think that that's your last
line of
your last
defense.
ditch effort. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it works if you can get somebody to do it. The difficulty is somebody willing to do this for every meal for 2 straight weeks?
That'd be tough. You have to have someone that's very motivated, ready to go.
I mean, you do, but the problem with this is it doesn't. 1 week is typically not long enough to really
Mhm.
find a distinct trend, because even water weight flux within 1 week can be
Right.
pretty drastic. And so, in some iterations of this protocol, I've seen people say not to use any spices. I don't know how you would be able to eat,
No way.
but I would say if you're going to use spices, find whatever spice that you're going to use, and then keep it steady.
Right.
Don't go nuts and change these things up constantly because you're going to get some water weight flux. Um, but these are the ways that you help identify that. And I think that if you're trying to do this just from a habit basis and you've gone through the process of adjusting habits as best you can, I think that these are the next steps.
Right. No, I like that. That's definitely a tool and toolbox for me because I had, and just that was a lot of fantastic information. And I guess where I'm seeing the holes in my own stuff is like being more communication, definitely, especially when it comes to nutrition aspect. That's probably number one, how people are feeling throughout that process.
Mm-hmm.
I think, well, and so here's the thing too. So I like to run a lot of 3-day food logs. Like, and depending on
How do you do
where the
those?
client, I'm sorry,
How do you do those? Like what kind
Thursday,
of
Friday,
information do
Saturday.
you? So when you do that, so you're running a food log, do they literally just write down everything that they've eaten?
Yeah, so my fitness pal, and then I try to get them to use barcodes more than anything because I feel like that's probably the most accurate. Hopefully, I
It
don't know. You
is,
tell me.
but well, it is, but tell them to verify the information,
Okay,
because I've actually seen some rare instances where you scan a barcode and what it says in the barcode isn't what it says in the back of the package.
okay,
And
yeah,
and so I always tell people, and so it's funny because I think that MyFitnessPal switched over to, I don't know if they still have the barcodes as a paid option or not.
it is.
It
I've been
is.
using my macros plus with clients now.
So the reason that I say that is because when people were really worried about that, I was like, don't worry about it. And they're like, why? It's so much easier. I'm like, I need you to check every time anyway. And
Mm,
so, and so, you're only going to put in chicken once. Like, how often are you, once you get your
right,
base foods down, you're not really inputting stuff that much. So I don't
right.
think it's really that annoying, but I mean, it's a pain. And why did they do that? But
Hmm.
yeah, they do need to double check those. And on top of the fact that they need to be conscious of the fact that there is cooked and uncooked weights.
Right. And that's something that I've been diving in more with clients who, and we're talking about like the 5%, the people that are like the stubborn, like, okay, what's happening? Like, we can't quite figure this out. You're not seeing that reduce. What's happening? Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, pull out, throw everything in the kitchen sink at them and say, right.
Do you keep a track of step count?
I do. Yes.
Okay. Have you noticed in those people that it's typically very low? Or has that not been your experience?
Not typically what I find, and because these are folks that will be, I guess where a lot of people lately, because people have been coming from the winter months out of bulks going into
Mhm.
summer months, is they're losing more muscle than they are fat a lot of the times.
Okay.
And so that's probably
Well,
like one of, go
with
ahead.
Dex, and you do Dexa.
If they feel like spending the money, hell yeah.
I mean, Dex is the only one that I would look into
Right.
for any of those, but there is still a 3% margin of error for Dexa.
Right.
So,
Is that 3% on the body fat?
3% on
Everything.
all of the measurements. Yeah,
Got it.
so the reproducibility with Dexa is decently good. However, the error variance is 3%. So what I typically do, first off, I don't have my clients do it, but
Right.
when you do it, I would do it no sooner than every 4 months.
Hmm.
And I say that because you need to break that 3% margin of error to really understand what's happening. So if you have 20% body fat and then it shows you're at 18, you don't know what that means.
Right.
You might still be at 20% body fat, or when you started, you might have been at 18% body fat, and then you're still at 18% body fat. So I think that a lot of people need to really understand what's going on with DEXA and these measurement protocols. And I actually did an interview with a professor out of Texas Tech. And this was one of my, actually a post on my Instagram where I did a whole breakdown of all the different at-home models for these things, the bioelectrical impedance, where DEXA ranks in comparison to all of these things. And it was like an 8-minute video that shows, okay, well, if you're going to do this, this is probably how you should do it.
Right.
And DEXA was the right choice. I think that you made 100% the right choice on there. And I only bring that error margin up because I don't know how many people know exactly what that is.
I didn't know.
And so when you understand what's going on there, it can be better for you as a coach because you can turn to your client, you can say, hey, maybe we shouldn't be doing this every month or 2 months or whatever it is. Theoretically, the longer that you can go in between readings, the better. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't do it any shorter than every 4 months because in an active phase, outside of your primer,
right?
Because you want to be able to see a change that you can say, I know that there's been change here,
right?
You know, and my biggest concern with these body composition measurement things is, one, as coaches, we're never going to use them to do programming. Mm-hmm. Like we'll never look at a body composition and say, okay, well, now I know how to adjust your nutrition. I mean, you get much better information from, you know, what's their rate of loss or gain on the scale over time? What is the change in the bodily measurements over time? Those are far more valuable than anything that DEXA can give you. Now, DEXA can be fun. And, you know, if people really want to see that, and a lot of people do, some people are numbers people, and that's fine. And so I don't have any problem with the coach recommending that. I got a problem with a coach recommending an in-body. I don't have any problem with a coach recommending a DEXA. Yeah. In-body's error is up from 8 to 11%.
Yeah.
So like I could go in and it could say I'm 24% and I could really be 30. And then I come back in 3 months and it says I'm 20%, but I'm really 31. Mm. So like, you know, it's so far off that it's just not even worth it. Whereas DEXA is the gold standard in research, one, because of its, you can get it's, you can find it in use pretty easily. It's not like an MRI machine that's going to be extremely expensive and people aren't going to want to go through it. And it's decently accurate. Mm-hmm. You know, but there are drawbacks and limitations. So as long as we know those limitations, we can use that. But to my point, you're going to use rate of weight loss or rate of gain, depending on what they're trying to do, whether they're trying to build muscle or lose body fat. You're going to use the rate of loss on a scale more than you're going to use anything else.
Right.
Because if you are consistently over, you know, the months losing 1 or 2 pounds a week, well, that's great. You know, we know that you're probably not losing significant amounts of muscle mass if your protein is being kept decently high and you're lifting weights. You're losing a moderate amount of body fat and you're losing mostly body fat. Now, if you're losing 5 or 6 pounds every week, then, you know, we're now probably dipping into the spot where we're losing lean muscle as well.
Right.
And having said that, you know, and for any of your clients that are listening, if you have weeks where all of a sudden you've lost 4 or 5 pounds, particularly in the beginning, don't worry about that. That's fine. It happens occasionally. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. Maybe you flush some water out. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. But once you get into that clip of, okay, well, I've been, you know, losing body fat for a month. Now I'm going to start to have that slowdown in that regular rate of loss. That's where you really start to look at that and say, okay, well, if we're losing that 1 to 2 pounds or whatever it is, depending on the size of the person, it can be higher if you're significantly obese. If we're losing that rate of loss, do we need to change anything? And the answer would probably be no. If you have something coming up, like you're trying to make weight for a powerlifting meet and you need to do something there, well, then maybe you increase, you know, the rate or whatever it is. But you're going to use that rate of loss or rate of gain much more than you're going to use something like a DEXA.
Yeah, exactly. I think the DEXA is a nice quarterly thing almost. It's just a stamp of approval, in my opinion. Like
I think it's fine if you can integrate it into your practice and it gives you some value.
Yeah. No, you said it earlier. Like I love using the measurements. Like I think that's probably my goal. Like what I like to see the most. And then like you're losing inches and the scale's going down. Mm-hmm. Like we're doing something right.
Yeah, and particularly comparing 4 weeks to 4 weeks rather than every 1 or 2, for women especially, because women of menstruation age are going to have hormone fluxes that are going to play hell a bit with scale weight for some people. So, 2 weeks ago, maybe you were in a light phase as far as how much water you're holding. And then, now you're at your heaviest part of your cycle, and it looks like you went up a pound, but you really lost a pound. You just can't tell it. So what I'll usually tell women that I'm working with is look back 4 weeks. Are we better than what you were 4 weeks?
Smart. Okay.
And if that's the case, then we're moving in the right direction. Don't worry about 2 weeks. We check in. I have check-ins every 2 weeks. We check in every 2 weeks just so we have an idea of what's going on, and so that we can manage emotional challenges better.
Right.
Theoretically, from a coaching perspective, once a person's dialed in, you probably don't really need to see them shorter than every 4 weeks. But from a physiologic standpoint,
Yeah.
but from a psychological and emotional standpoint, meeting every 2 weeks for me is a good thing. And then we can address a lot of those things if they haven't emailed me in the meantime.
The 2 week mark's nice because it gives them enough time to sort of wrestle with some stuff on their own.
Yeah, I don't like, a lot of coaches do a week, and maybe you do a week, and I don't want to insult you if you do.
No.
I don't like doing a week because people are like, I'm up a pound. I'm like, I don't know what that means. Like, it's been a week. Like,
Right.
that's not enough time for me to tell anything. When you come back next week, you might be down 3.
Yeah. It's the same thing. Like I offer weekly at the beginning, but I'm trying to wean you to 2 weeks as fast as we can. But also there's like dealing with people in pain too, so that gets a little funky. But
dealing with people in pain, you may have a distinct reason to do it more often.
exactly.
From a physique and performance standpoint, you don't really need to do it weekly. And I'm saying this in case any of your clients are listening and they want and you're trying to wean them to 2 weeks. Coaches do know that we don't need to see you every week, because we honestly will look at that information and then really not have any good feedback for you. We just a week doesn't tell us anything. And this is why I like the combination of official check-ins every 2 weeks. And then, you can email me as much as you want to deal with like psychological or emotional issues, because sure, that can crop up quickly, but we're not going to deal with, okay, well, am I moving in the right direction any sooner? Because I don't know.
Exactly. I think that is a perfect circle. It's all the way around to the beginning where you're saying expectations and time, like how long this stuff actually does take. The body's not going to just takes a lot longer. It's like,
well, and unfortunately, you're making a change for the rest of your life, not for the summer.
Exactly. And that's something that expectations you brought up, like, and even like getting people out of pain, losing weight, getting them in a fitness program, like you're elevating literally 95% of yourself to another level. Like, it's of self-improvement, in my opinion, right? Like, you have to, it's not one thing that you're just kind of playing with. Like, you start moving more, you start eating better, your mental health improves. Like, all of this is improving together. And I don't think people really understand that.
Yeah, I mean, self-confidence, self-worth, and we don't want to hinge our idea of self-worth on our physical self, right? But we can hinge our idea of self-worth on, progress that we've made, the commitment that we've made, making ourselves feel better, making ourselves be an example for our kids. You can see value in that, being able to keep up with your kids where you couldn't before. All of these different things add in, and these are all benefits once you start making this a lifestyle change rather than I need to get ready for my wedding, or I need to get ready for the summer. And there's nothing wrong with getting ready for your wedding, but understand that getting ready for your wedding doesn't end at your wedding. You can continue that on afterwards.
Right. It's crazy how the field has changed a lot. Like, even the past, I mean, I've only been in it for 12 years, but it's just like, I remember some of my old managers, they were like, oh, if they have that goal, like, you sell them on it, you got to like drive that in the coffin. It's like, man, now I look back on some of like the sales I made, like when I first started training, I was like, oh, we'll get you ready. And you just harp on that nonstop. Like, oh, it's summertime. We'll get you 4 weeks. Give me 4 weeks. Like,
yeah, I love the 90-day the 90-day challenge type thing. I hate challenges. And I know that a lot of people use them as a way to get buy-in. And yeah, they can be used effectively. I don't do them because I think that they can kind of set up wrong expectations. If you set the expectations correctly, if you're a person that does a 90-day challenge or whatever you do as a coach, but you set expectations correctly, I think that that's fine.
yeah.
I think that the problem is that a lot of people go into it without setting expectations, and they're like, it's just 90 days. And, having an end date is setting yourself up for failure from the start, because you either reach whatever your goals were at that 90-day mark, and then you drift off into apathy, or you don't reach that goal, whatever you had in 90 days, and then you feel like a failure. And it's like, well, neither of these are really the best case scenario for me. Right. So I think that again, setting proper expectations in that beginning, if you're a person that does these as a coach, it can work, but you need to be very careful about how you present these to people.
Exactly. Well, Allan, I think this is a good place to stop here. I think that's a great way to end it off there. How about you hit us with the socials, where we can find you, your products, all that stuff? Love to hear more about that.
Sure. You can look up my information at mauiathletics.com. I've got links to all my social media pages there. If anybody has any questions or wants to get in touch, certainly send me an email through a contact page on my website, or hit me up on Instagram, Dr. Allan, Allan Bacon, on Instagram, and I'm more than happy to respond with any questions that you have.
Perfect. Thank you so much for coming on the show, man. And we will see you guys in the next one.